Trump says he's in excellent health. His doctor says he's fully fit for office. But the questions aren't going away because the images keep changing. New bruising, new video, new scrutiny, and old medical answers that still leave gaps. I'm Stan, and tonight I want to show you why this story is getting harder to dismiss without pretending a camera can make a diagnosis.
Dr. Gupta, typically, how often should a person the president's age go in for a checkup?
Anna, good morning. Usually you do a checkup, physical exam at least once a year. If there are other concerns, chronic conditions that are being monitored, it can be much more frequent. And so the fact that we're getting 3 in a 12-month span, not entirely clear. And I would say that everything that Kayla just pointed out, these visible physical signs that we've seen recently attributable to non-credible reasons, the fact that he has bruising on his hand, to aspirin and frequent handshaking, lower extremity swelling that they didn't even note on his last physical exam readout in 2025, claiming it's chronic venous insufficiency now.
This story isn't back because someone dug up an old medical report and decided to recycle it. It's back because the questions never actually closed, and now they have new pictures attached to them. Months ago, CBS News and MS Now both looked closely at the medical summary released after President Trump's most recent physical and found the same basic problem: not enough detail. CBS's own medical correspondent flagged information gaps in the report. MS Now walked through a longer list: a statement dropped late on a Friday night, a physician's letter that read more like a conclusion than an explanation, and a pattern, stretching back years, of health disclosures arriving in the smallest possible form. Those were fair, sourced, non-hysterical questions. And they didn't get definitive answers. They got a one-page summary that said, in effect, trust the conclusion. Now bring the story to the present. The clip is simple enough. The president is walking across a tarmac, and he's repeatedly patting the side of his own leg, a small, repeated gesture that was enough to send commentators and casual viewers alike back to their replay buttons. It followed, by about a week, video of him gripping a handrail and moving carefully down the stairs of Air Force One, and it sits alongside earlier clips of him appearing to drag one leg while walking toward a helicopter. Let's be precise about what none of that shows. It doesn't show Parkinson's. It doesn't show a stroke. It doesn't show any specific neurological condition. A short clip cannot diagnose a president, and anyone telling you otherwise from a few seconds of tarmac footage is guessing, not practicing medicine.
Doesn't make a lot of sense. The rash discoloration on his neck. There's a lot of physical signs here beyond just his fatigue that warrant discussion and explanation.
Well, we know the president had a CT scan at his last visit in October, although they didn't disclose that immediately. He was diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency last summer, and in a colonoscopy in July, Trump had a diverticulosis and a benign polyp diagnosis. Is there any of this that would be cause for major concern?
From what you just said, no, none of those conditions in and of itself. But I think the broader concern here are twofold. One, will his doctors be honest? Or Anna, will they continue to editorialize? We didn't know, they didn't even know that he had a CT scan. They claimed initially, and they even put out a memo saying he had an MRI. And then the president on Air Force One had to say, no, he had a CT scan.
But dismissing the video entirely misses the more interesting question, which isn't, what disease is this? It's, what does this look like next to everything else we already know? And what we already know is not nothing. The White House has already confirmed that the president was tested for swelling in his lower legs and was diagnosed with chronic venous insufficiency, a real and common condition in older men. Bruising on his hands and arms has been a recurring feature of his public appearances for more than a year. attributed by his staff to aspirin and frequent handshaking. He has undergone repeated physical and cognitive evaluations, by his own account and his physicians. And there remains an open question raised months ago by CBS and MS Now, and unresolved since about how much of the underlying detail behind those evaluations the public has actually been given. That's the frame. One strange movement, taken alone, can mean nothing at all. A recurring pattern, sitting on top of an already thin paper trail, deserves context rather than dismissal. It's also worth being honest about a double standard here. During the Biden presidency, age, gait, memory, and public stamina were treated, correctly, as legitimate subjects for journalists to examine not as partisan attacks, but as basic questions about a person holding the most demanding job in the country. If presidential fitness was a legitimate question under Biden, it remains a legitimate question under Trump. This isn't a defense of how that earlier scrutiny was handled. It's an argument for applying the same standard consistently, regardless of who's in the chair.
How does a physician, especially the physician to the president, not know what advanced imaging their patient is getting? So that, number one. Number two, last time, back in October, they put out a highly skeptical readout of his physique, claiming that he had an NFL linebacker's physique, 6'3", about 220. Hard to believe, not credible. And then also sweeping statements on his lab values and his imaging, saying that they're quote unquote astonishingly good in the past. These are not normal descriptors or readouts of what a physician typically would use when describing their patient's health. So will they stop editorializing and just be honest and provide real data? We'll see. But right now, it's been very questionable what they put out. And two, I would just say his executive functioning. He keeps citing this Montreal cognitive assessment tool at every political rally.
He says he aces those tests.
He says he aces those tests, exactly.
And that standard points somewhere specific, back to the report itself, and to how much of the story it was actually built to answer. Over the past 2 weeks, the president has been photographed in public with visible bruising running up his forearm, a couple of Band-Aids on his fingers, and separately caught on video repeatedly patting the side of his leg as he walked across a tarmac. None of that, on its own, proves anything. A bruise is not a diagnosis. A hand movement is not a diagnosis. But there's a difference between looking at a photo and diagnosing a disease, and looking at a photo and asking for context. Seeing a bruise is not a diagnosis. But when visible questions keep returning, asking for context is not unreasonable. To be fair, the White House hasn't stayed silent on any of this. Officials have pointed to aspirin use, frequent handshaking, and a documented case of chronic venous insufficiency, a real common condition in men his age. Nobody here is arguing those explanations are false. The argument is narrower and, frankly, harder to dismiss. The more categorically the White House insists that everything is excellent, the easier it should be to explain each new episode as it comes up. So far, that hasn't quite been the pattern. And the golf course photos might not even be the most interesting piece of this.
Checked out perfectly. Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us with details. Nancy, good evening to you.
Tony, good evening. The White House is billing this as a routine annual dental and medical evaluation, though it's actually his third medical exam in the past year. All told, the president spent about 3.5 hours at Walter Reed Medical Center today. White House officials telling us we should get a readout from the president's doctor within the next day or so. Although, as you mentioned, Trump delivered his own report right after the visit, which he called a 6-month physical. He said, Tony, everything checked out perfectly.
So, Nancy, what do we know about the president's health as he prepares to celebrate 80 years on the planet?
Well, he was treated last year for chronic venous insufficiency, a fairly common condition for people his age. It can cause some swelling. He's also often seen with some bruising on his hands, which the White House has said is due to aspirin use combined with frequent handshaking. Otherwise, his doctor has said that his cardiovascular and neurological health.
There's also video recent, circulating, and harder to wave away of the president moving in ways that reignited the same questions from a different angle. Let's go back to the report itself. In May, after his third physical in about 13 months, President Trump's physician, Navy Captain Sean Barbabella, wrote that the president's cognitive and physical performance are excellent and that he is fully fit to carry out the duties of Commander-in-Chief. That's the official position, and it deserves to be stated plainly, without sarcasm. The letter also included, in past disclosures, explanations for the swelling and bruising that had already drawn attention. Here's the question worth sitting with. Excellent health is a medical conclusion. Does it answer the questions that made people ask for an evaluation in the first place? None of this requires believing the White House is concealing an illness. The more charitable, and arguably more accountable, reading is this. Maybe every explanation offered so far is exactly what it claims to be: aspirin, handshakes, a common vein condition, ordinary age. If so, transparency should reduce speculation over time. Instead, each new episode seems to generate as much doubt as the last one resolved. That's the actual problem. It was never about proving the official explanation wrong. It's about whether that explanation has been complete enough to close the loop on questions that a reasonable, nonpartisan observer would still have. And that question gets harder to wave off once you factor in one more detail. The man at the center of it just turned 80. Start with the number. Donald Trump is 80 years old, the oldest person to ever hold this office. That fact alone doesn't disqualify anyone from anything. Plenty of people in their 80s are sharp, capable, and fully functional. This isn't an argument about age as incapacity. It's an argument about the office itself and what it demands. The presidency isn't a job where health is a private matter in the way it might be for most people. The person in that chair makes decisions about war, about the economy, about who answers the phone during a crisis at 3 in the morning. That's why there's a legitimate public interest in a president's physical and cognitive fitness that simply doesn't apply to an ordinary citizen